Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Forged in the Spirit podcast. This week, I'm very excited. I was finally able to get an interview done this week, and this week I got Eric Phenicie. He's a friend that I met through my brother-in-law. We golfed a few times together and just got to talking about the podcast, and he got excited, wanted to get onto the podcast. Eric was born and raised here in Franklin. He is a U.S. Army veteran. He is a mail carrier in Oil City, I believe, and he lives at home with his wife and 3 kids, Carly, Bryson, and Elena. So I'm just going to take time to thank you, Eric, for being on the podcast.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
And so we got to discussing yesterday about some things that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to hand it over to Eric, and I'm going to let him talk about his younger years in the church and how it evolved him into his teen years. So, Eric, if you want to talk a little bit about your experiences as you were young and how you viewed faith and religion growing up.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, like you said, born and raised in this area my whole life. I think as a younger kid, growing into my early teen years, there wasn't very much of a church influence in my life or in my family, for that matter. My grandmother, when she was alive, she was a very big woman of faith. But outside that, there was little influence. I kind of never really got involved too much until I became a younger teenager. I was going to the Community Church of God. Sorry, I got to backtrack. That was the second church I went to. I initially started going to First Baptist right on Buffalo Street.
Okay.
Got involved with that. Mainly because a lot of my friends, a lot of kids similar age went there. So I kind of wanted to check it out, see what it was all about. Got very interested in the youth ministry there and going on some mission trips to Chicago and stuff, and really enjoyed that time. Felt like it was something that I wanted to continue to do, so we continued at that church. From there, one of my best friends at that time, he started going to a different church and was part of their worship team, actually. And long story short, he invited me out to Cooperstown Community Church of God. So I went on a whim one day and very much enjoyed it. But, being a young man, I was very much driven for the wrong reasons. I started initially going to that church because there was cute girls there.
Of course.
So that's kind of how it started. Over the next few years out there, the pastor there was a very big influence on my life. My relationship with my father was not a bad one, but it was a rocky one to say the least. My father was not a man that would show compassion or love or anything like that. It was more, if we had a conversation after a sporting event or whatever, I would expect to hear what I did wrong, what I could have done better. So the pastor kind of filled that role as far as building me up a little more than I think I needed at the time, or needed more than I thought I did at the time, I should say. So after that, I got involved with the youth there and kind of the youth and children's ministry. I can remember helping decorate the sanctuary the one time, pretty much me and one other person doing the whole vacation Bible school setup and everything. Just really, really interested in being there and serving other people. And that's how it started. And then it kind of declined from there.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that you see a lot is you have this fun activity place in youth group. I didn't have a youth group growing up in the church that I was at. I went to a small church in President Village, if you know where that's at, way out in the boonies towards Hunter Station Golf Course. Go down towards the Allegheny River. We did not have anything. And Cooperstown, actually, for everyone listening, is just down the road from the church that we're at right now, my home church. So it's interesting how small the world is around us. Having a parent that kind of is hard on you would be tough. You see that in the movies, the hard parent that wants you to succeed in every which way, but seeing God and for who He is. And I think that leads really probably into your adulthood and what you were going through in your marriage with your young Eric had a Bryson who was diagnosed with cancer at a young age, and how did that affect the way that you came with that diagnosis, and how did you react spiritually in that moment?
Um, well, I did have one other point, but we can kind of come back to it if we need to. But, well, I guess the Bryson one is coming up next. So just to backtrack a little bit, I don't recall exactly what the reasoning was, but at one point I came back to the church. I don't think that was my own doing. I think I was urged for a certain reason. And actually, the one girl that I initially liked when I started going ended up being Sarah, who I ended up marrying. But ever since then, so like I returned to the church, but I was what I would say is I was very much a convenience Christian, I guess is the best way to put it. I was going to church. I was in a relationship. Our relationship bloomed into marriage. Right prior to getting married, I did some other things as well. I joined the military, went off to basic training, did the whole college scene and everything like that. I actually went to Messiah College in Grantham, over by Harrisburg first.
Okay.
Very cool experience. I actually really enjoyed it. It's a very good Christian school. It just became way out of my price range, so I transferred to Clarion. And with the transfer to Clarion came all the pressure of the normal college culture, I would say. Did the whole school thing, and then after that, Sarah and I got married. We started regularly attending church because we wanted to be, we knew growing our family how we wanted to. We wanted to be a family that leaned into God and leaned into Jesus. I think Sarah was very much more so had a relationship with God and Jesus prior to me. I did, the regular attendance, but I would often look for any reason to not be in church, whether it was when they opened up Sunday hunting, if I could find a golf outing on a Sunday. If I could find something to do besides church, I would prioritize that. And that kind of continued in our marriage for many, many years. Even through the birth of our first daughter, Carly, and even once Bryson came along, everything changed, not completely, but a big part of it changed when he was diagnosed at 10 months, like you said. I can remember we were in Children's Hospital. I was actually out getting a coffee or something when they came back into the room. Sarah was in the room with her mother, Jackie, and she called me, and I could hear the panic in her voice, and she's like, "Where are you? Get here now." And when I came in, they both were bawling, and that's when, they told me that they had like 10 doctors come in and tell them that, there's no easy way to say it, your son has cancer. So for 2 weeks, we were in the hospital initially, and I can't say exactly what Sarah's thoughts and feelings were. I know for me, it was a lot of cursing and shaking my hand at God, a lot of questioning. Like, I can remember distinctly, like, with all the evil people in this world, or even me, who was not a good person at that point, like, how could this happen to a 10-year-old? Like, how could you let this happen to an innocent kid? So I had a lot of anger and a lot of resentment for God. Actually, an ex-girlfriend reached out to us. She is now a Christian counselor in a different state. Very, very good woman. And she knew we were struggling. She just reached out to give us some support. And I confided in her that I was very angry. And I can remember what she said to me was one of those statements to where I was like, I can't believe you just said this to me. Like, who are you? But I needed to hear it. And she said, no matter what happens, remember that Bryson is God's son first, not yours. And that, like I said, in the moment, I was like, how dare you? I don't know who you are. Week goes by, and I'm like, she's not wrong. So it kind of started to plant that seed. So pretty much what it was is we got to the point to where I can remember giving it up to God and saying, you know what, like, this isn't a cold, this isn't a flu. I can't give my son medicine. I cannot fix this. Me being I didn't realize I was as a control freak as I was until that situation. But I got to the point when I realized, I said, hey, I can't help this situation. Like, okay, you want to prove you're real to me, finally, like this is your chance. So I kind of gave God that opportunity. Um, a lot of prayers, a lot of reach out from family and friends and surrounding members of the community. We had a lot of support. Um, long story short, we were going every 3 to 6 months for scans. And towards the end of the scans, they had shrunk his tumor from, it was roughly the size of a softball when it first was caught in a 10-month-old's chest. We did 4 rounds of chemo, and it shrunk to the size of a golf ball. They decided to watch and wait and monitor it, which we were obviously all nervous about. We continued to see it kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then the one day his oncologist came in, and she had a set of 4 photos from the day of diagnosis to that day's photo. And she kind of looked at us and said, like, I can't really explain this, but she's like, this tiny little speck that you can barely see, it's either scar tissue or it's part of a dead tumor. And she's like, it's so small, we can't tell. So the fact that his oncologist pretty much told us that, they couldn't explain it. And at that point, we knew exactly, who had healed him, and how it had happened. And as much as it pains me to say, even at that point, it was very much like, cool, thanks. Hey, thanks God, you healed my son. There wasn't that praise and that joy that should have been there. It was very, very much more so like, okay, you proved you're real. I appreciate what you did for my son. I'm going to go back to, where I'm comfortable.
Yeah, because then, you don't have to have that feeling where you're like, oh, well, most people don't even think about giving God glory in any circumstance. I know, even as a church leader, sometimes I get to the point where I'm like, oh, look what I did, or I just kind of brush off anything that God's done for me. And, and to go back what you said before about the normalized college culture, that's something that we see in young people too often, going to college, and college overtakes everything that they do. And I think, even as you grow older and what happened, and you said you cursed God because of the diagnosis. And, I think the big thing is we always say that, why does something like that happen to a young kid? And, something that we really can't answer in the moment right now. It's something that we're always going to wonder. But to see what happened with Bryson, and I know what he's doing now, but, with playing hockey, and you guys are always traveling doing that, and he seems to be so healthy and happy doing that, and the pictures that you guys post on your Facebook pages of all the fun things that you guys get to do as a family now. And Bryson's how old now?
He's 8 now. He just turned 8.
So from 10 months to 8 years old, and you have this healthy young boy playing all these sports. And so when did you realize that you weren't given the glory like you should?
It was actually probably 2 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I think I finally got to the point where, between Bryson and some other stuff that had happened as I was a younger man, I started connecting the dots. And to me, I saw points in my life to where nothing else made sense. Like if you're not talking about a real God intervening in your life, whether it's healing or preventing some things that were happening or could have happened to you. I can recall one, like I said earlier, about the Vacation Bible School. I remember the one we were running in Cooperstown, and us having a tornado warning. And if you know the Cooperstown Church of God, right across the street, it sounds cliche, there's a big trailer park. So obviously, that can make you a little bit nervous. But I remember having, there was I think 6 of us, and I wasn't even an adult at the time, but hearing the sirens, having the kids gathered in the hallway, and just we walked outside because we're like, if something happens, you can't run. And seeing a black cloud coming right at the church, and just thinking like, surely God can't let this happen. He's not going to wipe us out with all these kids here. And I'll never forget, like, we saw the cloud split. and there's a tornado on each side of us. So kind of looking back on that, and then looking really like evaluating like Bryson and what his oncologist said, I got to the point where I couldn't deny there was, this was God's interaction in my life. So with that being said, I kind of finally said, okay, like you've proven me enough. I can't be blind to this anymore. I have to give you a real shot. And a lot of that started with my marriage. My mom and dad, I don't want to say they had a bad marriage. They had a good marriage, but it was very much a marriage that you didn't see, you didn't see love, you didn't see passion. There was some issues later on in life that never turned out to anything, no infidelity or anything like that. But communication issues and all that. So growing up, that marriage, a marriage of love and appreciation for your spouse was not modeled for me whatsoever. And I got to the point where at this point we have had 3 kids now, Carly, Bryson, and Eliana. And, it took a hard look in the mirror to realize like the best way I can model for my kids the marriage and the life I want for them to live is for them to see me and their mother. And at that point, I don't want to say it was a loveless marriage, but it was very much a roommate. It felt more like a roommate agreement. Like, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to come home, we're going to eat dinner, put the kids to bed, go to bed, wash, rinse, repeat. That's nothing, I never wanted that in my marriage for myself, because I know, like, I saw that as a kid growing up, and I saw some of the consequences that could have developed from that. So to me, like, I didn't want to put myself in that situation, and I didn't want to model that for my children. So I kind of just took a jump. Our youth pastor is at Atlantic Avenue, which is where I attend now. He was actually in our youth group from the Church of God, so I've known him pretty much his whole life. And I kind of approached him. I said, hey, I know you guys are doing some small groups. I was like, I think I need something more in my life. Just coming to church once a week wasn't doing it. It wasn't satisfying me, but it also wasn't me pouring myself into God or anything for that matter. And it just so happened at that point they were getting ready to get onto chapter 3 of a book. And the book was Making Your Marriage a Fortress by Gary Thomas. So I kind of picked his brain, asked him what it was about, and he kind of just said, hey, like, if your marriage isn't where you want it to be, if you feel like there's more, this would be a good time to jump in. So they welcomed me in, and the first couple of weeks I was kind of that fly on the wall, because I'm 38 now. So, I mean, I will say for myself, being a, almost middle-aged man, going to someone else's house, talking about emotions and feelings in my marriage to other men, felt very, very awkward. But I think by kind of just diving in and just saying, hey, like, God's proven himself to me, I really have to give him this shot. He has used this small group, whether it's 5 of us or 12 of us, between, I think, God's commitment to me and my commitment to kind of fully go all in. And then the other men, it has hands down changed the way I operate in every aspect of my life. I definitely still struggle with certain things. I'm not perfect by any means. And some of the places of employment, it can be hard, as far as working on your language and all that stuff. It's very easy to get caught up in that.
Yeah,
but
amen on that, man.
But yeah, it gave me that outlet of going to an area where other men similar to my age, and understanding like, hey, I'm not the only guy dealing with all this stuff. Like, whether I thought I was alone with my marriage and that, and, the issues from my childhood, having other like-minded men saying, hey, like, we've been here too. It kind of rocks your world when you think about it.
Yeah, it is important to be in that small group atmosphere. And like you said, even if you're middle-aged or whatever, I remember being in small groups and how hard it is to just, speak your existence. I remember the first time when I shared my story, how hard and nerve-wracking it was to do that. and to go into strangers' houses and say, here I'm laying out my life, and this is how I've lived, and you think you're about to get some sort of tongue lashing or whatever, and you don't realize how much everybody is alike, and how much because I think the stigma of the church is you think people are perfect, they have life figured out, they go to church, so they're good, and then that's when you realize people are just like each other, how much we struggle, what we struggle with. It may be certain aspects or different things, but we all struggle, and I think that helped you understand, that you're not alone with all this. So having a small group, yeah, that's a very important thing.
I think so. And I think what stemmed from that was it changed my life in so many ways, like I said, and it really made me want to dive in. And it just little everyday choices that I was challenged on by this group. I can remember the first week I was there, the leader, like he's very good at reading the room, reading other men. And he was like, "Well, welcome, Eric." He's like, "And not to put you on the spot, but why are you here?" And I can remember thinking, "Oh no." But it also it made me face that discomfort of being, vulnerable. So to me, like that meant everything. And then as the group went on, between that and our second book, we did, after that, we finished up, the Daniel Dilemma. And that is, let me see if I can write it down. Yeah. Standing Firm and Loving Well in a Culture of Compromise by Chris Hodges. Very, very good book. And I think very pertinent to the culture that we live in today. Everyone has, my truth, their truth, and you can't disagree on anything, or else, you're the bad guy. So to read a book that backs that by Scripture and with what Jesus said we are called to do, but also at the same time to build the bridge. It's not an us versus them mentality. So that book, I think, hit me a little bit harder than the marriage book, and it really challenged myself to even the smaller decisions. Like my choice in television shows has changed a little bit. That's one of my biggest vices still, is I still like the shows I can only watch when the kids are in bed.
Yeah, the entertainment industry.
But I dove deep into Christian music again, and I can remember so many times Sarah and us arguing and teasing each other more than arguing back and forth about how did we ever get married. Our views in movies and music are so not on the same page. And just when I kind of said, you know what, like my kids enjoy it, my wife enjoys it, I'm not worried about the message in these songs. And then I kind of just realized, like, you'll catch yourself just driving down the road and Caleb's on the radio instead of, some CD or some Pandora station from like 80s hip hop or something like that. So to me, it really bled into my life in so many more areas than just myself. This group made me want to be obviously a better husband at first, but it's made me want to be a better father and a better role model for my children about what it is to live today as a Christian man, as a Christian father. And that kind of has morphed into what I kind of feel called to do right now. I think for the longest time, I've always seen other people doing stuff, even, you doing this podcast. I've always wondered, where is my place in growing the kingdom? I have some talents, I'm not great at anything. I'm pretty good at artwork and stuff like that, but it's also been 15 years since I've done anything. So there was a lot of questions about where does God use me and what does He use me for? And for the longest time, I just wasn't sure if I was ever going to know what it was. The small group that I was in, it just made so much sense for me as far as changing my life that I wanted to give other men that opportunity. We did a Stop Everything and Pray month at our church, and I can remember our pastor saying, like, just so you know, when you do this, when you dive into this, like, you're gonna face attacks. You're gonna be under that spiritual warfare. And during this time, my wife and I, we'd made good friends with another two families that are homeschoolers, um, like we do with our kids, and we just kind of kicked the tires, like, hey, maybe these women could use a small group, and maybe their husbands could. And we kicked around the idea of us each kind of facilitating a small group for one for the men and one for the women. So we kind of dove in head first. I cheated a little bit with the men's group that I kind of helped facilitate, because I still felt very much overwhelmed, and I was like, I don't want to make a fool of myself or make people feel like super awkward if there's just all this silence. So we actually redid the marriage book. The one couple I know were new in their faith, and her husband had just really dove in and kind of got baptized and wanted to go in head first. The other couple, marriage was going good, but that guy admitted communication was a big issue with their marriage. So to me, I was like, okay, well, this makes sense. I've already been through this book. It might be a little bit easier to guide this conversation. So we did that, and it was awesome. I don't consider myself a leader, especially like a spiritual leader by any means. But seeing how far these two other men have come as far as opening up, and as far as like even like opening and closing prayers, like it was pretty much my responsibility at first, and I just kept saying, one of these days you guys are going to open in prayer, you're going to close in prayer. I kept teasing them,
getting them worked up.
But over the 10 chapters, seeing how much they've grown and what the relationship us three men have now means to one another, to where we can sit at the same table and we can say, hey, if you need support, I'm here to support you. But if you say something, and as a fellow Christian, I'm supposed to be that wise counsel. Like, if you need challenged on something, this is the Christian and loving way to challenge you and encourage you. So we actually just finished up that book, and we're getting ready to start a new one, and we just invited another guy. We have a fourth guy now. But I think, in kind of long story short, I feel that's where I'm called now, is to give other men that opportunity. I had a couple quotes that I wanted to share, because to me they mean a lot. And I think what it all stems from is, I mean, you're what, 30?
I'll be 33 in 4
33.
days, man.
All right, so he's a young guy still. So I'll be 39 this year. But I think you, like me, and even this older gentleman that joined us, he's in his 50s, I believe. I think there's a big generational gap here that, as a man specifically, there's all this stuff. Like, you don't talk about that. You don't talk about your feelings. You don't talk about your emotions. If there's a problem, you self-medicate. Whether it's substances, whether it's alcohol, like, you deal with it how you need to deal with it. You bury it down, and you never let it see the light of day. And I was very much that person. So I think this group challenged me to not be like that. So I wanted to give that opportunity to other men, because I think men, we are very simple-minded creatures, but asking for help or receiving help, that's one of those things that it's just, I'm told that I can't do that, and if I do, I'm less of a man.
Yeah.
So to me, like, these groups, one of the couple of things that kept coming across as quotes that really hit me was, the one is Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so does one person sharpen another. I think that's pretty pertinent, and that's kind of what the message of our first group has been, and I've tried to blend into this other message, just having that hope that, hey, like, whether you're a 20-year-old man or a 50-year-old man, or whether you're a woman in a woman's group, like, these groups, I feel like, are not utilized as much as they should be. I guess now that I've been in one and I've started the second one, like, the growth and just encouragement that you can get from these is really, really life-changing, to say the least.
Yeah, because John Wesley, that was one of his big things, was always small groups. And that's, you see that in a lot of Methodist churches with small groups, because that's where I started with my father-in-law. Was a small group at his church. And, you're able to talk to these men and like you said, you may be a little bit reserved at first, but when you start to talk and you're like, I'm having this problem with, the internet, and and these thoughts and in these visions, and they show you this love, because usually, the stigma is, well, it's fine, it's just you're reaching into your inner self, and you want to feel that joy in your life, or like you said, the stigma also is men should be hard and it's strong, and not care about anything, but we're human beings with emotions. And when people are finding their faith, and they that's the first thing they start to realize is how much emotion comes from us as men and women in this world that's so unforgiving to who we are, because the world wants to see us fail, and the more we fail, the happier people are. But and the rejoice in God to bring somebody back, like he says, when he leaves the 99 to find the one that's lost. There's so many of us ones that are lost, and when you found your calling, and it was a leap, and I know it's a leap because doing this podcast was a leap, because it was something that I never wanted to preach. I never wanted to do anything like this, but God calls you, and it's great to hear that you fulfilled that, because it's hard to, you're asking for a sign. He's giving it to you, but, well, I don't like that. I want something else easier. Well, you know that teaching small groups is not an easy feat, but those men helped you, and now you're taking that and helping other people, which is great to hear. And yeah, the iron sharpens iron thing used so much in our men's groups, and we have like that men's Saturday breakfasts. I know some people from your church go there. That's their big thing, and it works, because then you go and you listen to people like us who, you're a mail carrier. You're an average person out in the street, and I think that's the one thing that people see, like, well, the pastor does all the work. Well, the pastor's feeding us to disciple, and if we don't use that, where do we get? We get people like we were, well, I go to church every so often. Well, yeah, it's great when I'm a kid and I'm involved in all these fun activities, and then when life hits you hard, like what happened to you, you get mad, and then you go, okay, God, I'm going to give it to you. He gives you a miracle. I mean, a miracle to help your son get better, and then you just brush it off, because that's just our nature. But now, and you seem to have just delved yourself so spiritually into God, into a loving relationship, and it shows now through this small group, because he uses people that show genuine love, genuine repentance, and joy to do things.
Yeah, and I think that kind of pretty much sums up my story as of up to right now. The other quote, and the other reason I felt called to start this other group, like I said, was to give other men that opportunity, but to also model this for my son, for other young men, for other men and their sons. This is another one we've brought up before, and I love it. It also terrifies me, based on kind of what we said earlier, where we're taught not to talk about feelings, just to bury it all. That's the generation we were raised in. And now, today's generation, if people don't accept you for who you are, you're wrong. So we went from don't talk about your feelings to you can be a man, woman, XYZ, whatever you want to be. And the reason this one scares me, because I think it kind of talks about that. So to me, this quote hits hard, and you've probably heard it before, but hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And you can kind of see that just cycling back and forth. So to me, it's about reaching other men, encouraging other like-minded men, and even men that just need it in their life, that this small group is about acceptance and about, love and compassion, but it's about getting to know, God, getting to know Jesus. And then it's kind of like what our first group, like we've kind of struggled where, do we keep just meeting and doing a book? And like I said, I get a lot from that, but it's also like, hey, we're called to go out in the world. We're called to go make disciples. So to me, it's, whether it's me, whether it's, Joe Schmo, or whether it's you in the group, or our sons, it's like we're called to take this out, to other men of the world that need it. Just as, we've had this conversation with my wife, and I've told her the same thing. Like it's not to do in a small group just to meet, and have fun and eat pizza and talk about the Bible. Like that's great, but it's about it's about getting raw with one another, learning, and then going out and furthering the kingdom of God.
Yeah, because, the Great Commission tells us to baptize everybody in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And, we're sitting up here, and I've stood down on that floor many, many times telling people, it's like a lion's den out there. But, and don't hang your armor of God up inside the door here and walk out, because we got to be prepared for anything. And, it's hard as a leader, small group, church leader, it don't matter, getting people to understand our vision of the church, and then the love of, what you were shown in that small group was true Christian love. You got tough love. you got that Jesus love that said, you're forgiven, go and sin no more. You've got the tools you need to go out into the world, because like you said, when the calling came, how hard it was to accept it. And, and the love that you had for Jesus to say, I want to do something more. I've been there so many times. When I was young and in my 20s and went into the youth group and said, I want to do more. And then God says, okay, well, I'm going to give you more. Well, you don't realize how much more is. But it comes at not just, I'm not saying a bad price. It comes at a price of just joy and happiness, because how much happier are you now? Going into being 39 years old, knowing what you've gone through in your life and where you're at now, how much more joy do you experience knowing you're in this loving relationship with Jesus and what he did for you, and you're doing this small group. Yeah, as much as it's tough, like every week I get behind these microphones and I'm like, I got to do a podcast. Sometimes I'm like dragging about it. But, I realize the joy in it when, you send me an email and you said, wow, I never knew, how much you were involved in the church, your Christian way of life. And we had discussions, and how much that makes me feel great to know that there are people out there like looking and listening to this and saying, wow, he's hitting a lot of points home to me about calling. And, I realize what God gave me in my life to do this, and what God has given you. So how's it make you feel? I know you probably can't even describe it, but I'm asking you to describe it as good as you can.
I guess if I had to put a word to it, I would say just incredibly humbled, and almost dissatisfied with myself, like, as far as growing up into this, or from where I came to where I am now, because, whether we're talking about giving God a chance, or whether we're talking about serving, and taking that leap, when you boil it all down to it, it's like, okay, I'm nervous, I'm anxious about doing this group or coming onto a podcast. But if I'm a true believer, like, Jesus came and died for me. So, like, I'm not dying for anyone. I'm up here talking to other men that are, for the most part, voluntarily coming and wanting to be part of this group and wanting to better themselves. So to me, like, there's not a whole lot of risk in that. So that's kind of where now I'm wrestling with, okay, so how do we grow in our faith and in one another to then go out into the world, go out into someone that, is not, doesn't know God, doesn't know Jesus. One of my good friends, even a year ago, kind of circling back, I was rebaptized on August 20th, a couple years, I think it was last year. Yeah, last year. And I say rebaptized because I was baptized one time before that, and that was actually, I was in basic training in St. Louis, Missouri, or Fort Leonard Wood, in right outside of St. Louis. But that I viewed more as almost like well, in case I go to war and die, I want my soul to be saved, you know? It wasn't a true commitment to God. So this past August when I did it, I felt like I did it for the right reasons. So I felt challenged to kind of step outside of my comfort zone. So kind of like I was saying, one of my good friends, you know, we always get each other some little gift at Christmas time. And I think the one year it was he's a fan of the Nike Air Jordan. So it was Nike Air Jordan little ball markers for the green. And then, you know, last year I gave him a Bible, and I had all these things I wanted to say to him about, you know, where I was and how I got there. But I knew I couldn't say that like face to face at that point. So I actually gave him a copy of this. This is a Bible my wife got me. I believe it was actually an anniversary present, and she was very nervous about giving it to me. But it's called Every Man's Bible, and I very much enjoy it because it's, you know, it has your, I'm not sure technically what the translation is, but it's definitely like an easier read. But it has lots of side notes throughout it. Whether we're talking like if we turn to, so like here in Luke, it talks about faithful Mary, has little excerpts and stuff. Okay. You can look up different topics about anything from, you know, gambling, sex, pornography. It kind of tackles it all. So I used that to reach out to this friend, and I just wrote him this big long note because I knew I wouldn't be able to say the words, and I just said, hey, you know, I know you're not there yet, but you know, if you ever have any questions and you want to look in here, or if you're not comfortable doing it by yourself, like please reach out to me. So we're kind of sowing that seed, and we're doing a lot of praying about it. But like I said, that's kind of the wrestle now is, okay, I see this second group and what it's brought to me. Now, how do we get out there? How do we get to the people that don't know God and don't know Jesus and need to hear about it? And trying to do it the right way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a big thing, doing it the right way. Because, you know, we don't want to do more damage than what's already being caused, but you know, to listen to your story and hear how God's used you, I think it speaks volumes for somebody out there right now, because you know there's people listening to this that are on the fence. You know, and for them to be like, well, I don't really know how much I believe. I mean, you know, it doesn't take just a cancer diagnosis you know, because sometimes, you know, unfortunately it doesn't swing that way. But, you know, like I did a funeral for a real good friend of mine last week. And, you know, we look at what Paul tells the Thessalonians, you know, we don't grieve like those who have no hope. We grieve because we know that when Jesus rises, those who have gone before us will rise again, and we will be in eternity forever. You know, it's stuff like that to give an understanding that life has a purpose. You found your purpose right now. You know, that purpose may not be the same your whole life. You know, like mine's changed so many times. But you know, you may be listening to this thinking you don't have a purpose. Well, I'm telling you, Eric found his purpose, and you're using it in an awesome way, and you still have that mentality, you know, how do we get it out there? You're getting it out there right now, but you're trying to think of new ways all the time, is what it sounds like. You're always trying to be like, okay, well, how can we get it out there without being detrimental? What kind of new things can we do to succeed the kingdom? You're looking for the kingdom to succeed. And that's an awesome thing. And you know, a vision of mine was to have people like you on here so people could listen and be like, I'm an ordinary guy. I have a vision, and God wants to use me. I need an uplift. Well, you just listen to Eric's uplifting story of how his life was and where that got him and where God's putting him. And you know, we still have questions every day. We still have questions that we're looking for answers for, because we don't know everything. But take Eric's story as an uplifting moment. You know, take time to reflect on your own story. Eric is just a postman. He's not a pastor. He's a leader of God's kingdom, And that's what we're called to do. We're all called to be a part. We're a body. The church is a body. And, right now, Eric's the mind of his small group, but the people that are in that small group are the legs and the voices that are going to take it outside of your house, outside of wherever you meet. Eric, I just want to thank you for sharing your story with us today and being my first interview, because I know we've been talking about this for like a month, I think.
Yeah.
But this was part of the vision of this ministry, was to get people on here, share their story, share their struggles, and how they overcame them. It's awesome that God answered your prayer, and you keep praying, and it's great.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I was going to say, I did have one other point I wanted to make. How you kind of talked about if anyone's listening that they're on the fence. The simplest way I can explain it is, if you've tried the world's ways and it hasn't worked, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose about giving Jesus a real shot and a real opportunity? The one thing I did forget to mention, and I did want to make sure I mentioned this because it made a big impact too, was I'm sure a lot of people out there remember the show on A&E, how they had the Duck Dynasty show.
Yeah.
And if you had a camera in here, they would probably think we were on the show
between
the way we look. So they actually had a podcast, or they have a podcast. It's called Unashamed, and I think they're on something like 850 episodes going strong. I'm only on I think I'm about halfway through. I'm on episode 400 or something, or maybe 500. But even listening to that, I initially started listening to it because it was, I remember the show. They were funny guys. But hearing the funny stories, but then they dive into the word and hearing how brilliant these men, these ordinary guys, these duck hunters, how brilliant, of men of God they are. I think it just reiterates the fact that, whether you're, a duck hunter, whether you're a mail carrier, it doesn't matter. God, Jesus used the 12 disciples because they weren't Pharisees.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're on the fence, if you're not sure that there is something out there for you, I promise you there is. It's not always easy to find it, but I think you have to have that leap of faith sometimes. I know that's what it took for me. So.
Yeah, and it's like taking a leap of faith when you're afraid of heights too, man. Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. What do you have to lose when the world's already got you in a place where you're just not in good shape, spiritually, mentally, physically? Yeah, I appreciate those words, man. And like I said, appreciate you being on here. I know probably a little awkward to do a first interview, but we had a good time. Thank everybody for listening. Thanks, Eric, and your family and everything you do. Maybe sometime I'll get to join a small group with you or something. And, always good to collaborate and share views and discuss. So thank you, Eric. And to all the listeners, we love you all. We hope that you find peace in your heart listening to this. And like Eric said, don't be afraid to try something new, because what do you have to lose?